So it's Sunday morning, just about noon, making a second cup of coffee here. Got a bit of a later start to the day than intended, and you can hear the coffee starting to percolate here. But today, I'm making my coffee in a cup. Yesterday, I got the coffee maker ready, pressed start, walked away, heard the coffee being made from a few feet away at my dining table, came back and found this. So today I have remembered the cup. So my original plan had been to set off about 7 or 8 a.m. this morning, go out with this new hat I got, sunscreen, backpack, towel, and spend a good part of the morning and part of the afternoon reading in along the same trail, National Capital Trail, that I went out on last Sunday and did a bit of reading on, and I was deciding whether to take metaphysics with me or to go with something a little bit more accessible and perhaps easier to read outdoors in the wind and sun, and take out David Thoreau's Walden or The Journeys of Dorothy Wordsworth. But I did not manage to get out this morning. And as I said, it's about 11:30, not quite noon yet. I've been up since just before 10, and I've been watching some YouTube here, and I came across something I'm really enjoying. This is a 14-day solo camping trip in the Yukon wilderness by this guy, Jim Bard, who canoed solo for just about 14 days, almost 2 weeks, down a couple of pretty challenging rivers. And I've been enjoying it. This video is over 4 hours long. I started watching it last night right before the hockey game came on, and I picked it back up this morning, but the reason I got up late is because that hockey game really went late last night. The Leafs versus the Habs, the Montreal Canadiens, and it was fairly momentous because there were actually fans in the arena for the first time in 14 months, first time since February or March of 2020, right before the pandemic. And Montreal allowed, I think it was 2,500 fans to go out and watch that game. And unfortunately, Montreal did beat the Leafs in overtime. But there's always Game 7. And as I was telling my friend, 2020, 2021, this hockey season, if there ever was a season for the Leafs to finally win that Stanley Cup for the first time in over 50 years. This would be the year for it, but Montreal, Toronto seem pretty evenly matched this year, and they're tied 3-3, and so Game 7 will decide who continues on to play the Winnipeg Jets. And we'll see, still rooting for the Leafs. Hoping they win. And it's kind of fun this year because we have the Northern Division. So this was a good year for me to get into hockey and to watch Canadian teams just play Canadian teams. Kind of a fun year, a fun result of the pandemic. And of course, when you get to the final Stanley Cup games, of course, we will finally meet up with those American teams. But for now, me and my coffee are watching this awesome and kind of exhilarating 14-day solo camping trip in the Yukon wilderness. Okay, so it's about 2:15, and I've decided I'm just going to go out and do it. I'm going to go out and take that walk and take Henry David Thoreau's Walden with me, and it's been about 10 years since I read that one, so I'll be revisiting it. So I'm out here, I found a spot, and I've got Walden with me. As I preferred some things to others, and especially valued my freedom, as I could fare hard and yet succeed well, I did not wish to spend my time in earning rich carpets or other fine furniture, or delicate cookery, or a house in the Grecian or the Gothic style just yet. If there are any to whom it is no interruption to acquire these things, and who know how to use them when acquired, I relinquish to them the pursuit. Some are industrious and appear to love labor for its own sake, or perhaps because it keeps them out of worse mischief. To such I have at present nothing to say. Those who would not know what to do with more leisure than they enjoy now, I might advise to work twice as hard as they do, work till they pay for themselves and get their free papers. For myself, I found that the occupation of a day laborer was the most independent of any, especially as it required only 30 or 40 days in a year to support one. The laborer's day ends with the going down of the sun, and he is then free to devote himself to his chosen pursuit, independent of his labor. But his employer, who speculates from month to month, has no respite from one end of the year to the other. In short, I am convinced, both by faith and experience, that to maintain oneself on this earth is not a hardship, but a pastime, if we will live simply and wisely, as the pursuits of the simpler nations are still the sports of the more artificial. It is not necessary that a man should earn his living by the sweat of his brow, unless he sweats easier than I do. I would not subtract anything from the praise that is due to philanthropy, but merely demand justice for all who by their lives and works are a blessing to mankind. I do not value chiefly a man's uprightness and benevolence, which are as it were his stem and leaves. Those plants, of whose greenness withered we make herb tea for the sick, serve but a humble use, and are most employed by quacks. I want the flower and the fruit of a man, that some ripe fragrance be wafted over from him to me, and some ripeness flavor our intercourse. His goodness must not be a partial and transitory act, but a constant superfluity which costs him nothing and of which he is unconscious. This is a charity that hides a multitude of sins. The philanthropist too often surrounds mankind with the remembrance of his own cast-off griefs as an atmosphere, and calls it sympathy. We should impart our courage and not our despair, our health and ease and not our disease, and take care that this is not spread by contagion. From what southern plains comes up the voice of wailing? Under what latitudes reside the heathen to whom we would send light? Who is that intemperate and brutal man whom we would redeem? If anything ail a man, so that he does not perform his function, if he have a pain in his bowels even, for that is the seat of sympathy, he forthwith sets about reforming the world. Every morning was a cheerful invitation to make my life of equal simplicity, and I may say innocence, with nature herself. I have been as sincere a worshipper of Aurora as the Greeks. I got up early and bathed in the pond. That was a religious exercise, and one of the best things which I did. They say that characters were engraven on the bathing tub of King T'Cheng to this effect: renew thyself completely each day. Do it again and forever again. I can understand that. Morning brings back the heroic ages. I was as much affected by the faint hum of a mosquito making its invisible and unimaginable tour through my apartment at earliest dawn, when I was sitting with the door and windows open, as I could be by any trumpet that ever sang of fame. It was Homer's Requiem, itself an Iliad and Odyssey in the air, singing its own wrath and wanderings. There was something cosmical about it, a standing advertisement, till forbidden of the everlasting vigor and fertility of the world. The morning, which is the most memorable season of the day, is the awakening hour. Then there is least somnolence in us, and for an hour at least some part of us awakes which slumbers all the rest of the day and night. Little is to be expected of that day, if it can be called a day, to which we are not awakened by our genius, but by the mechanical nudgings of some servitor, are awakened not by our own newly acquired force and aspirations from within, accompanied by the undulations of celestial music, instead of factory bells, and a fragrance filling the air, to a higher life than we fell asleep from. And thus the darkness bear its fruit, and prove itself to be good, no less than the light. That man who does not believe that each day contains an earlier, more sacred and auroral hour than he has yet profaned, has despaired of life, and is pursuing a descending and darkening way. After a partial cessation of his sensuous life, the soul of man, or its organs rather, are reinvigorated each day, and his genius tries again what noble life it can make. All memorable events, I should say, transpire in morning time, and in a morning atmosphere. The Vedas say, all intelligences awake with the morning. Poetry and art, and the fairest and most memorable of the actions of men, date from such an hour. All poets and heroes, like Memnon, are the children of Aurora, and emit their music at sunrise. To him whose elastic and vigorous thoughts keep pace with the sun, the day is a perpetual morning. It matters not what the clocks say or the attitudes and labors of men. Morning is when I am awake, and there is a dawn in me. Moral reform is the effort to throw off sleep. Why is it that men give so poor an account of their day if they have not been slumbering? They are not such poor calculators. If they had not been overcome with drowsiness, they would have performed something. The millions are awake enough for physical labor, but only 1 in a million is awake enough for effective intellectual exertion. Only 1 in 100 millions to a poetic or divine life. To be awake is to be alive. I have never yet met a man who was quite awake. How could I have looked him in the face? We must learn to reawaken and to keep ourselves awake, not by mechanical aids, but by an infinite expectation of the dawn, which does not forsake us in our soundest sleep. I know of no more encouraging fact than the unquestionable ability of man to elevate his life by a conscious endeavor. It is something to be able to paint a particular picture or to carve a statue, and so to make a few objects beautiful. But it is far more glorious to carve and paint the very atmosphere and medium through which we look, which morally we can do. To affect the quality of the day, that is the highest of arts. Every man is tasked to make his life, even in its details, worthy of the contemplation of his most elevated and critical hour. Why should we live with such hurry and waste of life? Why are we determined to be starved before we are hungry? Men say that a stitch in time saves 9, and so they take 1,000 stitches today to save 9 tomorrow. As for work, we haven't any of consequence. We have the St. Vitus dance and cannot possibly keep our heads still. If I should only give a few pulls at the parish bell rope, as for a fire, that is, without setting the bell, there is hardly a man on his farm in the outskirts of Concord, notwithstanding that press of engagements which was his excuse so many times this morning, nor a boy nor a woman, I might almost say, but would forsake all and follow that sound, not mainly to save property from the flames, but, if we will confess the truth, much more to see it burn, since burn it must, and we, be it known, did not set it on fire, or to see it put out, and have a hand in it, if that is done as handsomely. Yes, even if it were the parish church itself. Hardly a man takes a half-hour's nap after dinner, but when he wakes he holds up his head and asks, "What's the news?" as if the rest of mankind had stood his sentinels. Some give directions to be wakened every half hour, doubtless for no other purpose, and then to pay for it they tell what they have dreamed. After a night's sleep, the news is as indispensable as the breakfast. Pray, tell me anything new that has happened to a man anywhere on this globe. And he reads it over his coffee and rolls. With a little more deliberation in the choice of their pursuits, all men could perhaps become essentially students and observers, for certainly their nature and destiny are interesting to all alike. In accumulating property for ourselves or our posterity, in founding a family or a state, or acquiring fame even, we are mortal, but in dealing with truth we are immortal, and need fear no change nor accident. The oldest Egyptian or Hindu philosopher raised a corner of the veil from the statue of the divinity, and still the trembling robe remains raised, and I gaze upon as fresh a glory as he did, since it was I in him that was then so bold, and it is he in me that now reviews the vision. No dust has settled on that robe. No time has elapsed since that divinity was revealed. That time which we really improve, or which is improvable, is neither past, present, nor future. My residence was more favorable, not only to thought, but to serious reading, than a university, and though I was beyond the range of the ordinary circulating library, I had more than ever come within the influence of those books which circulate round the world, whose sentences were first written on bark, and are now merely copied from time to time onto linen paper. I kept Homer's Iliad on my table through the summer, though I looked at his page only now and then. Incessant labor with my hands at first, for I had my house to finish and my beans to hoe at the same time, made more steady impossible. Yet I sustained myself by the prospect of such reading in the future. I read 1 or 2 shallow books of travel in the intervals of my work, till that employment made me ashamed of myself, and I asked where it was then that I lived. Most men have learned to read to serve a paltry convenience, as they have learned to cipher in order to keep accounts and not to be cheated in trade. But of reading as a noble intellectual exercise they know little or nothing. Yet this only is reading in a high sense, not that which lulls us as a luxury and suffers the nobler faculties to sleep the while, but what we have to stand on tip-top to read and devote our most alert and wakeful hours to. I think that having learned our letters, we should read the best that is in literature, and not be forever repeating our ABs, and words of 1 syllable in the 4th or 5th classes, sitting on the lowest and foremost form all our lives. Most men are satisfied if they read or hear read and perchance to have been convicted by the wisdom of 1 good book, the Bible, and for the rest of their lives vegetate and dissipate their faculties in what is called easy reading. This is a delicious evening when the whole body is one sense and imbibes delight through every pore. I go and come with a strange liberty in nature, a part of herself, as I walk along the stony shore of the pond in my shirt sleeves, though it is cool as well as cloudy and windy, and I see nothing special to attract me. All the elements are unusually congenial to me. The bullfrogs trump to usher in the night, and the note of the whippoorwill is borne on the rippling winds from over the water. Sympathy with the fluttering alder and poplar leaves almost takes away my breath, yet, like the lake, my serenity is rippled but not ruffled. These small waves raised by the evening wind are as remote from storm as the smooth reflecting surface. Though it is now dark, and the wind still blows and roars in the wood, the waves still dash, and some creatures lull the rest with their notes. The repose is never complete. The wildest animals do not repose, but seek their prey now. The fox and skunk and rabbit now roam the fields and woods without fear. They are nature's watchmen, links which connect the days of animated life. I find it wholesome to be alone the greater part of the time. To be in company, even with the best, is soon wearisome and dissipating. I love to be alone. I never found the companion that was so companionable as solitude. We are, for the most part, more lonely when we go abroad among men than when we stay in our chambers. A man thinking or working is always alone, let him be where he will. Solitude is not measured by the miles of space that intervene between a man and his fellows. The really diligent student, in one of the crowded hives of Cambridge College, is as solitary as a dervish in the desert. The farmer can work alone in the field or the woods all day, hoeing or chopping, and not feel lonesome, because he is employed. But when he comes home at night, he cannot sit down in a room alone at the mercy of his thoughts, but must be where he can see the folks and recreate, and as he thinks, ruminate himself for his day's solitude, and hence he wonders how the student can sit alone in the house all night and most of the day without ennui and the blues. But he does not realize that the student, though in the house, is still at work in his field and chopping in his woods as the farmer in his, and in turn seeks the same recreation and society that the latter does, though it may be a more condensed form of it.